Okay, we're ready to go. Got everything going. Hopefully, it's not too much background with the stuff in the background. Anyway, so today, what's going on? Going to talk about a little bit of patterns and about what some people consider defective verbs or defective adjectives or adverbs in this case. And that is something that to do that. So much French in the background. The um, the thing that happens with humans is that yes, in first language acquisition studies, among other things, is that we try to grab onto patterns, and patterns help us learn languages, among other things. We also look for patterns in weather, patterns in behavior, all sorts of things. In fact, almost all sciences are based on establishing patterns or generalizations. And a lot of people want to say, don't generalize. Well, this is incredibly stupid because most every science is built upon generalizations. In fact, there's a whole art of actuaries who use statistics to look at what is the possibilities or the probability of a certain person at a certain age from a certain place doing something. A lot of times about dying. What's their chances of dying? A lot of people want to say there's exceptions. Yeah, individuals exceptions, but the group and aggregate is very predictable and very accurate. So anyway, I want to bring that in because a lot of people try to dismiss scientific or academic pursuits. And what I'm talking about now is about the patterns that people look for in languages. So what happens is that certain things used to be part of a language. For example, let's use English, I guess. Oh, here we go. And there are some there's a there's a common idea now that because people they learn the past, they learn the present tense or the non-past tense because actually English really only has two tenses. Now those people who went to some prescriptive idea of grammar don't understand this. But yeah, it's basically English has a past and a non-past tense. Tenses have to be inflected. That does not mean that you add other words. That's different. That is not a tense. So you gotta learn your descriptions. Number one. Anyway, so people learn certain things, certain verbs that follow a pattern with the ed, the ed sound, the ed sound, which is changes between in actual phonetics. Sometimes it's pronounced this way, and sometimes it's pronounced this way. This is represented in the iconic script system of this in English. This morpheme is significant because it is distinctive because it represents the past tense when added to a word like let's just use talk. So when this is added in writing, talked. Now there's two morphemes here. I'm going through a lot here. Talk, which is one morpheme, means one thing. It cannot be broken up into anything else because ta and uk don't mean anything in English. They don't. They're not morphemes alone. Okay, there are phonemes, but they're not morphemes. But the ed, the ud, the ud sound, this part is another morpheme. So there are two morphemes. If you break this up, if you're doing certain work, well, this is also how speech recognition software is designed around this also because it has to know the morphemes of a language. And if it's set around English, it knows that if it hears talk and talked, that it means two different things. That this is one morpheme and the ed is another morpheme, meaning past tense in this case. So talk can be now, can be now, or can be habitual. It can also mean habitual time. I talk could be I talk a lot. Could be recent past. Could be predicted to in French would be like something like futur proche. Okay, so that's using prescriptive grammar because a lot of you don't know descriptive grammar, so I can't talk to you those things you don't know about as you're learning what I'm doing here. Anyway, so that is the normal. So children start picking up that this morpheme means past tense, so they'll start putting it onto everything, and that is not accurate because there are some verbs, and also I'll get into some other things. Some verbs that are not that way. For example, sit. If you follow this, and you'll hear children doing this a lot, and sometimes second language learners, that they will say that the past tense is sitted because they've learned this morpheme, right? So they make an error because they're predicting, they're generating from the pattern that they've picked up. The pattern is that they've heard two morphemes, and they've seen it and learned it through experiential learning that it means past tense, and so they generate that this must be the past tense for sit. However, it is not. It is, as those of you who are educated English speakers know, is sat. Now, why is this happening in English? Well, because number one, this is what a lot of people want to call now defective, meaning it doesn't follow a pattern. But this is not true because the people who think that way don't know about the history of English language. These verbs that take an ed for a past tense, these are considered weak. These were considered weak verbs. If you go to in German, there are weak verbs, and there's also weak verbs in Old English, which is where I'm going to with this. So, in Old English, there are weak and strong verbs. The strong verbs change tense by changing the vowels. You notice this? Because this which is, whoops, I can't even write because I'm writing this way. Actually, in English is usually this. That's a schwa sound, as opposed to the. It could be this. I'm just going to go with this. Okay, depends on the actual person where the vowel is located. I'm not going to get into it. But the sit, sit. Yeah, it could be this one, or it could be this one. That's a line through there. Could be this vowel. These two are morphemes, and they were more used in the past. They're still used in German. If you study Old English, you'll learn about this. But these are retained in English. Some verbs still retain the strong verb changes, which are about the vowels and not the consonant sounds, because, well, actually we have a consonant with a vowel actually for the past tense sound. Although a lot of times it's once again just schwad. In English, that just goes schwad because English is a stress time language, which is one of the reasons why English speakers have such a hard time getting the correct prosody for languages like Spanish or French or Italian and some others, because those languages are syllable time languages. So English speakers try to put their L1 onto whatever, to Italian or Spanish or French, and try to speak it as if it were English, and it does not work because the differences because okay, here's an example. In Spanish, per phrase, per clause, more or less, there are two stresses. In the same space, in English, there are four. So that's why you hear that awful. It's in Spanish, it is awful. The like the typical English speaker sound in Spanish, killing it, doing these stresses, and especially hitting in English, because generally the first syllable is stressed in English. Doing that when in Spanish it's the second to last in most cases syllable that is stressed. It's horrible. That's why it's very difficult to understand the people. It's the same thing as listening to from India speakers in English because they retroflex and change because the tongue position is different for everything they're saying, and also they stress differently. And this makes it very difficult for people who've learned the phonemes and morphemes from in a certain location from a certain sound wave. Okay, because that sound wave has now changed, so it's very different. So this is the reason why I've said before that prosody is extremely important to be understood, for someone to be understood. Now, there are a lot of different versions of what is considered native speech. For example, in English, there are several versions of native English. Now there are more speakers of English as a second language than there are of as a first language, so they are changing things also. But for example, just because you're an L1 speaker of English does not mean that you understand someone else who is an L1 speaker. I can guarantee you that you can find somebody from Texas who will not understand somebody from the Hebrides. Both could be L1 speakers of English, but because they're incapable of changing their speech patterns and dropping the idiomatic speech and looking for the high frequency in common words, they won't be able to communicate with each other. They might be able to pick up some things here and there. If they're right back and forth to each other, yeah, they can understand each other. Now, but the point here was that I was getting to this, and that in every language, there are especially verbs. Let's stick with verbs right now. There are verbs that do not follow a pattern, and those are the ones that everyone says you must memorize these. You must have a lot of contact with them to integrate them, which is, yes, actually memory. People say memory is not important in language learning are incorrect, because everything actually is memory. It's just how do you put it in your memory, or which way is it internalized? Are you auditory? Are you visual? Are you kinesthetic? Do you have a mix of those modes for your learning? So anyway, so what? So the common ones where there's changes, or the one where you really see changes in European languages, let's use that right now, is in English would be the to be verb, which expresses existence, state of being. It's also a linking verb, a copula. I will not get into several Oriental languages because it's completely different and it doesn't exist. And there's such things as adjectival verbs in Oriental languages that don't exist that English speakers can't understand. Number one, but anyway, so to be. So we know that in English that this is, I am. This used to be. Now we got what we are. Plural, and this is leveled to just now to you are, or and they. So they are, and he is the singular. I'm mixing up things here because I'm thinking about how much to talk about this stuff. Anyway, so that's English, and it's not regular. It's one of the few verbs in English you have to learn the conjugations for, because most of the verbs in English have leveled. So anyway, another one is to have. But anyway, let's stick with the to be. So let's go to Italian. So you have sono here and sono here. So it's really weird. You have this going on in English or English, Italian. Io sono, sai, siamo, siete, sono. These two are the same. Confusing to learners a lot of times. Okay. Of course, you've got this. In Spanish with this would be ser. So you have the same, you have the same thing. You have the same thing going on here, right? So you have the same thing going on here, right? Right. So you can sort of see you sort of see so here. The conjugation, of course, is totally different here as opposed to the Italian. But you can see, if you look here, in Italian, there's another vowel added because Italian phonotactics is always with a vowel ending. Spanish is almost always with a vowel ending, but so you know the sound doesn't really change by doubling the written form of it, but that's the anyway. So that, and you can go to être in the French. We can, right? So now the orthography of French is nothing like what the phonetics, because there's a lot of things written that are not pronounced, correct? Right. So you start seeing how the European languages that are influenced by Latin have cognates, obviously, right? Anyway, so this is enough right now. I just want to show these two because these two are the ones that are connected almost all the languages. The Romance. Anyway, and you also have to have is also, which in English there used to be this, thou hast, which you can see the Germanic ties with that. This was the singular, you singular informal, instead of the you plural formal, which now has become also which is you. I mean, I should have said this. This is the second person singular informal, and what's happened is the second person formal plural has taken over, which is the you. You know that, right? You have, right? In this case. Anyway, so talking about this, I'm mentioning this because these are the things that give people a lot of problems because they're looking for patterns. And of course, patterns make life easier because if you can predict from a pattern, you only have to learn a pattern. You don't have to learn each individual case. But as you know, especially, for example, in Spanish, that the preterito has a lot of changes. The stems change. There's a lot of changes. So you can't really predict. With more and more contact with the language, you can start to get certain things. Your accuracy will go up on predicting what's going to happen, but it's not going to be correct all the time. So one of the things that I want to say here is that by being able to understand the language from a descriptive point of view, knowing that this is common, especially knowing that in European languages, that to be and to have, to use the English, words there, avere and essere in Italiano, I don't know, I've just got some Italian in my head right now. That those two are all you have to learn every conjugation, and that's just present tense. Now in Romance languages, you do have more than just a past and a non-past, but in English you only have a past and non-past. You have a huge number of tenses. That's why inflectional languages are very rich in their ability to convey information. They convey more information in a shorter period, a shorter space. That's been studied also than isolating languages. Now, English is a mix, and as it levels, it's becoming more isolating. It's not really an isolating language. An isolating language would be like Thai, for example, where the verbs don't change. There's no inflection for the verbs. There is no tense on the verbs whatsoever either. Everything else is relegated to a particle or to another word, because that's what's going to combine together. Like go, yesterday, past tense for go. Use that for example, bailao, bailao krap in Thai. And so this is an important aspect to look at. You don't want to just try to get into a language, especially if you don't have a good understanding of your L1 explicitly. Implicitly, everybody, and people say, I don't need grammar. Yeah, everyone has grammar. Grammar is just a structure, underlying structure of a language. Everyone understands grammar in their L1. implicitly, not explicitly. But the problem is that when you want to learn a second language or a third or fourth language, it helps you to be analytical because it saves a lot of time, because the way you learned implicitly was through a lot of experiences and a lot of interaction. That can be done if you've got a lot of time and you're in a stimuli rich environment. But those people, especially those people who are trying to learn a language removed from the language community, which I do not recommend because it serves no practical use, pragmatic use. Now people try to write to me, oh, this person does this and that. Pragmatic, okay, pragmatic means to be able to use it. Doesn't mean being able to read it in books for literary purposes. That is not a pragmatic usage. That's a ancillary usage, because pragmatics means you use it daily for tasks that you must achieve. If you must eat, that language is pragmatic. If you must ask for the bathroom in that language, that language is pragmatic. If you're not doing those things, it's not a pragmatic usage of the language. And there's a lot of other things I'll get into in another talk, because someone brought this up and I was considering talking about it in the past, and I may go into, I just don't want to give away a lot of information that a lot of these YouTube people don't know, and then they'll just take the information, because they don't value it. Anyway, so that's a little bit about patterns and how to approach patterns from an explicit point of view, and how to look at it so that you understand it in an analytical way, because as an adult you generally want analytical answers to things. You always ask why. It's a child, you start asking why. So the why is very important to you, so you can understand why this is done, because you're always comparing between your L1 and your L2 or L3. In fact, the people who do languages at extremely high levels are capable of interpreting or translating between the languages, meaning that they understand implicitly what is different and what's going on, or how to express themselves more or less, because Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is correct, comes into effect. So they're able to translate, and you'll see those people and they will talk to you on video about how they practice translating between different languages or interpreting between different languages. And I've seen this with people who have high levels. We used to do this at language school. Someone says something to you in English, you automatically shooting it back in Spanish or Thai or whatever, because you're so used to translating. It's just automatic, and that's how it comes. Anyway, look at language in a different way. Don't be so caught up in this anti-intellectual idea about languages and you don't need grammar. You have grammar. You're a moron. It's just that you don't know that it's implicit. For language learning, explicit usage is very important. Okay, so I cleared that up. Now, I want to once again reiterate here, because people don't have any sort of listening comprehension skills, and they don't seem to be able to read what I write. Look, if you want to comment on my channel, I want your real name and a real photo. Your opinions have to be cited work, and not just your idea running your mouth because, oh, gee, look, you're an authority after 1 hour of running around on YouTube. I don't care. This is a higher standard. If you're not capable of adhering to a higher standard, I don't want you on here. I'm trying to get away from the anti-intellectual people who have no basis in any sort of training, no basis in any sort of educational paradigms or educational background, who don't have obviously linguistics background. We all know that. They're not actual linguists, and they're not real educators either. But yet they want to talk about all these things. That's why I said, please tell me about pre-Columbian art, because you're also obviously an expert on that. Anyway, so that's what's going on. All right, so that's one more talk down and another free learning experience brought to you by me.